Welcome to Xhibition, an Xbox podcast, episode number 18. My name is Samuel Adams, and every week this is a show that talks about the world of Xbox, the biggest news of the week, and hits the highlights of everything that you need to know. Now, before we dive into this week's news, I do want to talk about a comment that I received last week that said, podcast centered around Xbox talks about PlayStation and PlayStation games seems about right. So, the reason that I talk about PlayStation games on an Xbox podcast is because it's important to understand Xbox's place in the context of the larger gaming space. That is a part of the modern gaming conversation. Now, of course, if you want to live inside of an echo chamber, that's perfectly fine, but when you look at the competition, you get to see how these choices that other publishers, other platform holders, the choices they're making, you get to see those impact Xbox in the coming years because iron sharpens iron. It's kind of one of those competition breeds new ideas sort of situations. So that's why I talk about PlayStation. That's why I talk about Nintendo. That's why I talk in general about the gaming space with a specific skew over to Xbox, just to kind of clear the air. Now, with that being said, this week we are absolutely talking more about the world of PlayStation a little bit because there was a showcase this week that not only revealed some pretty big third-party games, we also got a look at what PlayStation is bringing to the table. So we'll talk more about that and how that stacks up next to Xbox in terms of the next 3 to 4 years of content coming out from both of these teams. But on top of that, we've got some very big remasters on the way, some remakes that are coming down the pike, and you'll be able to play Halo Infinite much sooner than you thought that you might have been able to because the next big flight is on the way. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into it. Before we dive into the main news of the day, I do want to talk about these Redfall leaks that have come out online. Of course, these are peppered all over social media if you do want to see them for yourself. I'm not going to be showing them off here on today's show, just out of respect for the development team, because obviously it sucks when anything like this leaks, and I'm kind of hesitant to even talk about it. But I do want to point out the reaction, really, on social media, and it's been very divisive, where you have some people, like myself, saying the game looks pretty good, considering that this is early development. And then you have PlayStation hardcore fanboys that are throwing it under the bus, and you have very, how do you say this, negative reactions on social media, overwhelmingly negative reactions on social media from a lot of very vocal people about how this game is shaping up. And to those people, I do want to say, these are very early screenshots. And it looks pretty good as it stands right now. Of course, a lot more optimizations are on the way, a lot more environmental improvements are on the way, because these are, once again, very early development. And so you see even one screenshot that I saw where it's in third person, and this is a first-person perspective game, so you can't judge anything based off of anything the developer has not put out there publicly. That's kind of the way that I have gone about my time in the gaming space and how I look at games. If a developer has not said anything about the game publicly, then it shouldn't really be taken as a proper representation of the game itself. Just in the same way that we are discussing PlayStation. Everything PlayStation showed off during this week's showcase was highly prepared, highly curated, and they knew what they were showing. In the same way, the Xbox showcase earlier last month and earlier in the summer, you saw what they wanted you to see. And that's exactly how it should be. That's how marketing works. So going in and analyzing these Redfall screenshots could get you some insights into how the game is actually going to play. Of course, they have been discussing a lot of the loot mechanics, which are pretty readily apparent in the leaked screenshots. But outside of the mechanics themselves, you can't dive in and analyze screenshots and expect to see a proper representation of the final product you'll be getting when the game eventually launches. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say on this right now. I'm excited for Redfall, and I'm hoping to have a squad to play it with whenever the game does launch in the future. Of course, yet to be determined as of right now, but looking forward to seeing more about Redfall in the weeks and months ahead, of course, from the proper and official channels, hopefully. Let's go ahead and start off with talking about this week's PlayStation show and how it kind of stacks up to the lineup that we see coming from Xbox. And to begin, there are basically three major announcements in my mind that really showcase what PlayStation 5 is exclusively bringing to the marketplace. Or I should say the PlayStation brand is exclusively bringing to the marketplace that other people simply can't do without and that will never be available on other locations outside of potentially PC, because Sony is continuing to dabble and invest in that side of their business. But the three big announcements from this week's show were Spider-Man 2 coming from Insomniac. I love some good Venom. Love Spider-Man. Always been a fan favorite of mine. But on top of that, we also have a Wolverine game coming from Insomniac Games. So it seems like they're kind of building out this superhero universe. Then on top of that, we also finally saw some footage of God of War 2, which is officially titled God of War Ragnarok. So that is very exciting news all around, and I'm very happy for the world of PlayStation, because now you see some of these big PlayStation 5 games that everyone has been looking forward to. This is when the next generation really comes into its own. With that being said, those three games specifically aren't coming until 2023 at the earliest. God of War could potentially be next year, but we'll see what comes of that. In my opinion, it seems like these are pretty far out. You also see the announcement that Cory Barlog will no longer be directing God of War, so that leads me to believe that it's potentially a bit earlier on in the overall development than many PlayStation fans might hope. So let's go ahead and assume that those three games aren't coming out until 2023 at the earliest. I would say Spider-Man 2 will come out before God of War, and then after God of War will come Wolverine. Of course, there are plenty of other games coming as well. Forspoken is one that I know caught a lot of people's eyes, as I see here scrolling through the Eurogamer article. And then, of course, we'll talk about the third-party stuff in a moment. But Klobrille on Twitter really put together the best visualization of what to expect from Xbox and PlayStation in the years ahead in terms of exclusives. And this kind of puts everything into perspective for me. It seems like there is a larger collection of games coming from Xbox currently as compared to PlayStation. Now, there are obviously still unannounced projects in the works, but as it stands right now, it seems that the biggest new additions to the PlayStation lineup include Horizon Forbidden West next year, followed by Gran Turismo 7, then God of War Ragnarok potentially sometime in 2022. I don't know if that date has officially been confirmed. And of course, what are dates at this point in time anyway? Stuff is getting pushed back. The Delta variant is creating new obstacles as well. And then you see more of the show and Spider-Man 2 and Wolverine. But with Xbox, you also have tons of other games that are coming out in the future. Of course, you have Deathloop included in this piece here from Klobrille because it is going to break out of that console exclusivity. But Starfield, Avowed, Forza Motorsport, Perfect Dark, Contraband, Fable, State of Decay 3, The Outer Worlds 2, Senua's Saga Hellblade 2, The Elder Scrolls 6, a lot of big games lining up in the Xbox roster, on top of so many more. Now, like I said, it could just be a difference in messaging. It could just be a difference in when these companies want to announce what they're working on. But as it stands right now, I personally don't feel the need to get a PlayStation 5 until the latter half of this generation. And on top of that, when you consider the recent moves that PlayStation has been making and the recent acquisitions they've been making, a lot of these teams are beginning to work on new projects, and they began to work on new projects in 2020 and 2021. And so looking to the future, 2024, 2025, that's when you begin to see a lot of those projects become realities. And I've always tried to figure out when to buy what console, because I'm not made of money. You know, in the same way that I tried to make the right choice in high school, I've got to make the right choice now, where I spend a specific amount of money and get a value out of my piece of hardware. And so if I'm looking forward to upgrading a PlayStation 5, I'm probably not going to get one until the mid-generation upgrade, when inevitably hardware gets a bit of a boost, potentially in a Pro model. On top of that, it gets a bit smaller because the PlayStation 5 is absolutely massive. And then you see games like Returnal and Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart and Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut. All of these games, by the time the mid-generation update rolls out, will now be budget titles. You'll be able to get these for 10, 20 bucks, and that gives me the option to go back and retroactively play these while simultaneously still enjoying a third-party experience on my Xbox Series X that continues to bring the heat with not only third-party support, but on top of that, a lot of big first-party games as Microsoft continues investing in the next generation. So with all of this being considered, it really comes down to the fact that PlayStation had a great showing this week, and I'm very excited about Spider-Man 2, very excited about Wolverine, very excited about God of War, and I look forward to playing those games in the future. But as it stands right now, the amount of content that's being pumped out across PC and consoles from Microsoft, it really just dwarfs what's coming from PlayStation currently, and especially for someone like me that doesn't really care about games like The Show and Gran Turismo 7, there's just a lack thereof of games that I really want to play from PlayStation currently. Not to say that I won't in the future, because I grew up a PlayStation fan, I'll always be a fan of the brand, but there is just, quite frankly put, more happening on Xbox right now. Now, when it comes to third parties, it was also a very exciting week because that PlayStation conference kicked off with a reveal of Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic Remake, which is coming to PS5 and PC as a timed exclusive. This is incredibly exciting for longtime fans of KOTOR. Of course, if you haven't heard of Knights of the Old Republic, this is one of those legendary games that so many people played growing up whenever it came out in the early 2000s, and it's good to see that it's finally coming back, because this is something that has been revealed, and it's something that has been rumored for a very, very long time. Now, as they say here on Destructoid, the remake is in development at Aspyr in collaboration with Lucasfilm. Not much more info was shown during yesterday's reveal, but it was confirmed as coming to the PlayStation 5. And on top of that, it seems that Electronic Arts is not going to be involved here. I know that BioWare has given their blessing on social media, so potentially you will see some kind of support from that team, but I do also know that BioWare veterans are working on this game. People that originally worked on KOTOR are being brought back to work on this. I've also seen some concerns on social media that one of the main sources of narrative direction has publicly said that they are not a fan of the original Knights of the Old Republic, so that does lead me to kind of question where this project will go. But I do believe that they understand the gravity of the situation. I think they understand the weight of the name Knights of the Old Republic. That's the biggest thing for the development team to understand, because when they can kind of comprehend the impact that the game had on a cultural level, they can really begin to dig into and understand the impact that the remake is going to have. And I was listening this morning to the Kinda Funny Xcast, and I'll echo what they said there here. I think that if I had to guess, what KOTOR remake will end up looking like is something akin to what you see with a Mass Effect Legendary Edition, where you see a lot of the same kind of hits and beats as the original plot, as you would expect, with a couple of improvements here and there. Now, you could see an entire rebuild from the ground up, or you could see something akin to what happened with the Master Chief Collection, where Halo 2 was completely remade in terms of cutscenes, but then you also had some revamped gameplay that still echoed the original. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this in a world that is filled with remakes and reimaginings and all of that good stuff. But ultimately, KOTOR Remake is real, and it's going to be coming out at a later date. No release date has been defined as of yet. But it stands to reason that if the original Knights of the Old Republic came out in 2003, a 2023 20th anniversary certainly does seem fitting. That's kind of the way that I'm reading into it. So we can see what goes on with that and keep track of this project as it continues to evolve. But that's not the only big remaster announcement that was made this week, because Alan Wake Remastered has had a release date set for October the 5th. And of course, if you want to check out the entire reveal trailer, you certainly can. But ultimately, this improves the visuals of the original thriller, and it's going to be released across PlayStation, Xbox, and PC on October the 5th. Now, I will say, if I head over to alanwake.com, we'll go ahead and pull that up. because there are comparison screenshots of what to expect from the remaster and what to pick out in terms of the improvements here. And just checking out the remake, in my opinion, it looks good, but it doesn't look much better than good. It seems to me that it's pretty clearly targeting the PlayStation 4 as its console of choice or the Xbox One as its console of choice. You see the detail in the textures, obviously, on the walls, especially when it comes to the distance rendering. You've got a much larger rendering distance to where you can get some detail in the sky, much better detail in the water and stuff right here. But this does not look like a next generation game to me. It looks good, but it doesn't look like a next generation game to me. And so I like the lighting improvements that have been done, and I think that will do wonders, of course, when it comes to how you use the flashlight and that kind of thing. But in terms of remakes, I certainly wouldn't consider this one to be groundbreaking, and neither does it really have to be, because the original Alan Wake is already fantastic as is. But if you were looking forward to a, breathtaking reimagining of Alan Wake and rebuilding the entire game from the ground up, certainly doesn't look to be the case. I would kind of classify this remake as what would be possible if you used mods on PC. That's kind of what you're going to be getting here. And that's perfectly fine once again. And if you do want to pick it up, once again, it is coming out on October the 5th. I'm going to try and get you a price here, just so I can go ahead and clear the air on that. $29.99 is what it's going to be for Alan Wake Remastered, with smart delivery included. Of course, you do have plenty of upgrades if you want to go from the PlayStation 4 to the PlayStation 5. Free upgrade for you. Xbox One to Series X. As I said, smart delivery is supported. All of it is good to go. So for $29.99, I guess you can't really complain with these visuals now that I'm kind of weighing the actual price of the product versus the aesthetic that it's kind of bringing. But it is always good to kind of keep those expectations in check. I will say this is one of those games where people absolutely adore it. It's kind of a cult classic, more or less, if you want to call it that. And I played through most of it earlier this year and enjoyed it. I understand why it's significant, and I like the flashlight mechanics a lot. Shooting also doesn't feel too bad, but I'm glad to see that it's getting the love that it deserves on the next generation after a pretty long stretch of teasing from the team behind Control, because you did have some Alan Wake DLC coming to Control, and now, of course, you see Alan Wake finally making his return. So again, if you do want to pick this up, it's coming to PlayStation, Xbox, and PC on October the 5th. But on top of that, before Alan Wake comes out, you can also check out the next Halo Infinite multiplayer test flight, which is going to kick off on September the 24th with a cutoff of September the 13th for registration, according to Liana Rupert over at Game Informer, who, by the way, is departing Game Informer at the end of September. Super bummed to see her go. Huge fan of her work. Definitely go follow her on Twitter and see what she's up to next. But I'm glad to see that the test flight is coming back once again. Of course, I'm sure they're going to be baking in the lessons learned from the first round of test flighting. But it's important to give, number one, the developers a lot of feedback to make sure that the game is ready for launch. And number two, it's important to give the actual community some hands-on time with the game. This is what I would consider to be not quite a beta, but basically taking the place of a beta. And to be able to get in there and get your hands on the game early, even through the Halo Insider program, is important not only for testing, but in terms of marketing. It gives content creators time to stream the game and really let the community see what's coming. And on top of that, the competitive side of Halo gets a chance to dive into the latest experience and really get some hands-on time with the game. So I loved the first test flight. I'm looking forward to seeing the later builds that are going to be coming with this second version of the test flight, to see the improvements that have been made and kind of get a feel for how the game is sitting as we are inching closer and closer to launch, which again is December the 8th. they've got some time to kind of play around with this one and make sure that it's ready to rock. Now, preloads are open now if you do want to go ahead and preload Halo Infinite, but in the comment section down below, or if you want to hit me up on Anchor.fm, do you preload games this far out from the actual release date of the title? Because I've always been kind of confused as to why people would take the time to download Halo Infinite and really take the space even to download Halo Infinite so many months ahead of launch, because the amount of Game Pass games alone coming out and being added to the service between now and the time that Halo Infinite launches, I don't really see the need to take up that amount of space as it stands today for a game that I can't really play. Now, having the Halo Infinite test flight installed on your machine makes perfect sense because you never know when a new flight is going to be revealed, so it's good to have that at the ready and you can just pop it in and rock. But don't really see the need for Halo Infinite this early on. Same could be said for Forza Horizon 5. Just kind of thinking through that, I suppose if you had bandwidth restrictions, like you had a data cap and you wanted to space it out month after month, you could potentially download one game out of the entire holiday season through August, September, October, November, and December to not have to incur those overages. But outside of that, can't really think of another use for it. So let me know in the comments section down below. But additionally, let me know if you are diving into the Halo Infinite test flight for the second time around. I'll definitely be seeing you online on September the 24th. That wraps up this week's episode of Xhibition, an Xbox podcast. If you enjoy the show and you're new here, hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Drop me a like down below. It really helps out the channel. But on top of that, if you're listening to a podcast version of the show, add the show to your subscriptions feed and get it delivered to you every single Sunday. Would love to have you in the community. But until next week, you guys have a fantastic one and keep on playing.